it stopped changing. I think it's just changing. There's no okay, just like there's no movie stars anymore, right? Like you mentioned, in the 80s and 90s there was Tom Cruise and Julia Roberts, and there was the Brad Pitt. There was all these people that everyone knew who they were. Everyone knew who they were, and they'd seen their movies. They had an opinion on them, and it's funny because it's here we are in almost 2023. And it's like the same people. It's still it's still Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise because there's no new ones, And it's not that there's no new movies, but there's no new superstars. In fact, there are TikTokers who I probably have never heard of that are more famous with people who are alive than movie stars from the 90s and early 2000s. It's just that because it's so fragmented now, it's so spread out over all these different mediums and all these different channels, and anyone can be, any girl with a phone and a nice figure can dance around and lip sing some fucking song, and now billions of people know who she is.
She's an influencer,
right? Yeah, and she'll get tons of money just dancing around and lip singing the song, and she gets millions of dollars, and so everything's kind of shifted in a way that it's made it so there's not. I'll tell you what has kind of leveled out. One of the things that did change a lot was the technology, right? Like the technology
before you get into this, just let me show you something that I posted on Telegram to make this exact point. But it also goes for hairstyles, decor, etc. Now I'm going to show you 4 photos. Sorry to interrupt, but I think this actually backs up what you're going to say. No, that's fine. Right, here we go. Here's the first photo. Now, as you can see, this is, I would guess it's the late 70s, maybe early 80s, but maybe even the mid 70s, not quite sure. But it's around that time. Now, this one is clearly the mid or late 80s. And then the next one is clearly the late 90s. I think you'll remember that, the iMac.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And suddenly they were everywhere. It was like that. I mean, you go in, like at my school, it was like that. And public librries and all that. It was, every room was like that. But anyway, then we get to the next one. And so that's clearly the late 90s. We all know it. Maybe at a push, the early 2000s. But anyway, wait till we get to the next one. Now, is that 2003, 2008, 2015, 2020?
Right. Well, it's like iPhones, right? The first iPhone is fundamentally the same as the newest iPhone. It's been what now, 20 years, something like that? Since the first iPhone?
Yes, about 15 years, yeah.
There's not going wrong. There's differences, right? The camera's better, the screen's bigger and holds more shit on it, and maybe it's faster or whatever, but it's fundamentally the same thing. It's not like this ground. Well, and I think that's just the case with technology in general. They used to have, what was it, Moore's Law, that every 6 months, everything would double in speed and capacity and everything else. That kind of stopped. Around, you could probably find it, but I think like around the time frame you're talking about, like early 2000s, Moore's Law kind of just pittered out. It stopped being the case. And look, in terms of innovation, I'll tell you what, there's software packages I've used for 20 years. If you look at the difference between Adobe After Effects, for back in this, CS5 or whatever, however long ago that was, CS3, versus Adobe After Effects that you now have to pay per month just to use. You can't even buy it. It's fundamentally the same. They add a couple things here and there, but it's fundamentally the same software.
Yeah, it's really not. I mean,
it's not revolutionarily different. It's not like, oh wow, good thing this is so much better than the old way. It's exactly the same as the old way. There's more options, but that's not nothing that really affects workflow. Nothing that really makes it. In fact, most of the shit is stuff that's not even. It's not that it's not available in the old ones. or even a tool that you'll ever use. And that's another thing too, is all these things are changing to subscription models, but they're not getting better. Which might be why that might be driving one of the many factors, driving the plateau, is that, well, we don't have to make it any better. We get paid every month if they just use it, so it doesn't matter.
Yes. Well,
So
I'm guessing that you don't even have to use it.
Yeah,
the money will keep going from your account to theirs. So
right. No, that's the thing is everything's turned into subscription based. Like the software I used to use all the time was After Effects and stuff like that. And when they changed to like, oh, instead of just buying it and using it for like 5 years or whatever, which you could easily do, and before you start getting mad that maybe there was some kind of technical limitation, but usually there wasn't. Then now you have to pay, $40 a month just to have it on your computer. And it's like, what? and then even Cinema 4D, which is the 3D package that I would use. They went from, you could just buy the software, no big deal, to now you have to pay every month. And and look, that's another good example. I've been using Cinema 4D, which is this 3D package, since version like 8.6 or something like that. And there were dramatic changes up until, I'd say, I don't know, version 14 or 15. They're on like version 23 now, and it hasn't changed at all. And every time, in fact, what if anything does change is they break the backwards compatibility. So you can't open your old files. You have to, pay the money for the new one that does nothing.
See,
except
that is outrageous. This is one thing that I just can't forgive. How the fuck can't you? I mean, you just put one program onto that job, and it'll probably take a few days for him to make sure that the current program can read the old files and just convert them into the new format.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
no, it's on purpose.
This should not be a problem. This problem simply should not exist.
No, it's an invented problem. They do it on purpose. In fact, that part of one of the last streams I did, we talked about planned obsolescence, and how these same wonderful tribesmen came up with the concept, especially after the war, after World War I. You had this manufacturing base in America that was used to churning out all these weapons of war, and they didn't want to lose that. But Americans didn't need to keep buying. The average American's not buying airplanes and bombs and shit, but they wanted to keep the conveyor belts going. They wanted to keep the machines going. So they went to oh, I always forget this guy's. I forget everyone's name actually, but the guy who it was Freud's nephew, and he came up.
Yeah, I know. I'll look it up. You just keep.
Yeah,
talking.
I'm talking. Bernays.
That's it. Yes, Bernays.
Yeah. So Edward Bernays says, well, the problem is Americans, they buy things that they need, because that's a problem. If they need a shovel, they look at commercials or advertisements that advertise, well, this is the best shovel. And so they go, oh, well, Shovel Co. makes a shovel that lasts 10 years. And that sounds good to me. I'll go buy the shovel. And Edward Bernays says, nah, you're doing it all wrong, boys. You're doing it all wrong. See, what you got to do is you got to get them to think that by getting the shovel, their whole life will change. their whole outlook on life, their dick will get bigger. It'll be like the best shovel ever. And don't even talk about the shovel. In fact, don't even have the shovel in the advertisement. Just tell them that they have to come to Shovel Co. and their life will get better, and women will want to sleep with them. It'll be amazing. And you'll be able to sell them shittier shovels, because the brand Shovel Co. starts to become part of their identity. Like think to like the people that'll camp out in front of an Apple store every time a new iPhone comes out. It becomes, the brand becomes part of their identity. And so he came up with this idea that you just make shitty products that expire, that in fact they become unfashionable before they become unusable. And so it's more of a fashion statement. You're trying to keep up with this identity of having the fanciest, nicest, coolest thing. And look, rappers figured it out. Like if you remember 90s rap, they would always say like the year somewhere in the song, like 1996, what? You know, because if you're listening to that song in 1997, you're listening to the shitty old song. You have to get the new one, you know? And so like you're putting expiration dates.
I always remember a line from the Black Eyed Peas. I don't know how the fuck I came to listen to this, but I always remember this line. It was, I'm so 2008. You're so 2000 late.
Right. Exactly. No, that's what exactly. It's putting expiration dates on shit that doesn't need an expiration date. And in fact, not in the documentary we were looking at, but in researching planned obsolescence, one of the things I came across was light bulb manufacturers. Light bulb manufacturers were getting upset with some light bulb manufacturers getting upset with the other ones because, like, oh, your light bulbs are lasting way too long. You know, this has to be a consumable. You know, they had the technology to produce a light bulb that would last, 50, 100 years. In fact, you can go on YouTube right now and just look up the 100-year-old light bulb or whatever. There's a light bulb that's been going for 100 years. You know, those filaments that are inside there, they don't need to like just burn up after a certain amount of time. They only do that because they carefully planned exactly how long it would take for those to burn up. In fact, all the light bulb manufacturers in the world got together and said, you know what, we're going to make light bulbs that only last 1,000 hours. And if your light bulbs last longer, you have to pay a fine. Like they were in this cabal of light bulb manufacturers, and if your light bulbs lasted too long, you paid a penalty because you're fucking up the scam. And so this kind of thinking has been going on in America for over 100 years, where they're another famous. Everyone has this problem. I almost never have to print anything, and every time I do, it seems like I have to buy a new printer because like I'll get a printer, print up like the 3 documents every 5 years that I have to print up for some reason. 5 years goes by, I have to print something else. And now all of a sudden the printer's it hasn't been used in 5. It's been just sitting there on a shelf. It's either broken, you can't get the ink cartridges for it anymore, something, right? And I have to go back to Walmart and buy like another whole fucking printer and throw that one in the trash. And then if you manage to have a printer that still works, the ink cartridges almost cost more than the new printer. So this is something they've been doing for a long time. And it's part of why I think, if anything, it'll probably accelerate the fall of the West, in terms of as things degrade. A lot of people always ask me like, oh, when do you think that, the empire is going to fall, the American empire is going to fall? And it's easy to say, and I believe honestly that, well, it's so big and there's just so much momentum behind it, and it's not going to be like an overnight kind of a thing. It's going to take it a while to go down. But if there's anything that will accelerate that, it's that all these little tactics that they've been using to screw people over, it only works when you can afford it. You can afford to make shitty light bulbs that burn out too fast. You can afford to make this cheap shit. You can afford to make stuff that people are having to constantly consume because you're whipping the slaves hard enough to where they want to keep consuming it, and they're buying it. But at a certain point, I mean, people are going to get tired of the game, and now everything's going to still suck and break all the time, but you're not productive enough to keep buying the new shit.
Absolutely. I mean, somebody just mentioned that he's got a LaserJet printer from 2001 that still works perfectly well. And I do think that, if I recall correctly, I mean, a LaserJet printer doesn't use ink. So,
oh yeah, no, the old HPs from back in the day that used toner, those still work. In fact, you can go on eBay and they're like almost as expensive as they were when they were new, because this is before they started doing the the Canon disposable inkjet printers.
Yeah, I mean, I remember getting a printer that could actually print onto a disc, onto a CD or a DVD. That was
Yep.
really exciting back in 2004 when I think it was.
Well, yeah, it's funny. Even like the old school 80s printers with the dotted, perforated paper you had to rip off the sides.
Oh yeah, I had that at school.
Even those still work. If you find one of those in at a Goodwill somewhere on a shelf, you can take it home, hook it up, and it'll still print. Like, it'll be loud as hell, and it won't be that nice. But yeah, they everything's built to just break now. Apple's been cut. I think the EU even got in a lawsuit with Apple because they were purposely. It's not that you buy this top of the line iPhone and then 2 years later it's already too slow to open Facebook. It's not like, well, what? How did Facebook really become that much more advanced in 2 years that like a processor from 2 years ago can't look at your Facebook feed? And the answer obviously is no.
It actually, I've heard that the programming on Facebook is continually getting worse because what they need to do is overhaul the entire website. What they're doing instead is continually adding new layers of code to so that it's constantly getting slower and more clunky.
And there is a lot of that because
I know what you're saying. So I don't want
to, and there is a lot of that too because you have people that don't know how to code. Basically, it's no longer the original. Okay, so perfect example. Back in the 80s, if you played an arcade game like Pac-Man or one of these famous classic arcade games, you look up and see who developed that game. It's usually one guy, sometimes two or three, but usually it's like one guy made the whole game from start. In fact, Steve Wozniak of Apple, he made the game Breakout. Where you're bouncing bricks off the off a little you slide the I guess a block back and forth that hits another block that then makes the blocks go.
It's like ping pong thing.
Right, yeah. It's like Pong, only you're knocking like a wall away. But he made that entire game. There's not a line of code in that entire game. It's all hardware. So using just hardware, he designed that game for Atari, and then got ripped off by Steve Jobs, who sold it to Atari for like 5 times what Wozniak got paid. But that's something else. But anyway, but the point being, there were people like that designing the hardware, designing the software, and then we start having basically programming languages that would cut through a lot of the repetitive nature of coding, right? So, you'd have libraries already built out. So you could just use a command that would be like a shortcut instead of having to write like all this fucking code to do something simple that everyone is always having to do. Someone just wrote it once, and then you can just recall that command and it'll execute it and you're good. So that started to be like a shortcut. And so now it was more accessible to more programmers because you didn't have to know, basically binary in order to accomplish, simple tasks. You could use, you could basically stand on the shoulders of the programmers before you, right? But we're at this point, we're standing on so many different shoulders that like it's this unruly. In fact, that's probably why After Effects looks exactly the same as it did in 15 years ago, and because like you're saying, it needs to be just completely thrown out the window and rewritten. But they're just trying. They just have this monstrous code base that they're having, this unruly code base with teams in India are writing parts of, and people in Silicon Valley are writing parts of, and contractors come and go and are writing parts of, and it's just this big messy spider web of garbage. And there's no one person like there was in those arcade games I was talking about. There's no one person that can zoom out and look at the whole thing and understand it all. It's just this mess. And so that's another part. And look, the individuals writing it, they don't know what they're doing. They know how. There's a huge difference between memorizing the steps and knowing that if I do X, Y, Z, this happens, and understanding, well, why does that happen? And more I've discovered it I used to work with closely with programmers all the time, and I would notice that year after year the IQ level was dropping. You used to talk to these guys and they were so autistic, and you're just like, I don't even, I can't understand what you're saying half the time. It's so over my head. And then you get to these, and then it got to programmers instead of programmers, where these people that heard, oh, you want to make money, go into computers, and it's just people that would learn some programming language, but had no idea what was going on the back end of things. Didn't understand hardware. And that's just, I guess that's increasingly the case. But as with everything else, I don't think it's going to matter much, because AI is probably going to fill those gaps. There's an AI just the other day, in the same way that everyone's seeing, like, you go to those AIs and say, draw me a picture of a frog riding a motorcycle, jumping over a humpback whale or whatever, and it makes it. There's AI that you can tell it, all right, write me code that accomplishes this, and this, and it just spits it out like instantaneously. So I think that, it's a problem. You're having like these intelligence plateaus, but I think that AI is coming in just in time to alleviate the problems associated with that, or change the problems, I guess, to probably something else.
A lot of people are very skeptical about AI, and they say that it's being exaggerated, and it's not really thinking, it's not actual thought, it's just a load of if-then statements.
Right.
This seems, this seems naive to me. As I understand it, they're building AI in the same manner that a human brain develops, or a human mind develops, where it gradually learns and develops, improvises algorithms, and then tests how well those algorithms work, how well the results of those algorithms match up with reality. So in other words, it's continually getting better at understanding things. That's my understanding of how AI is actually being developed. So the idea that it's just a bunch of if-then statements that have been written by human programmers, I don't think. I mean, maybe some of them are like that. But
no, excuse me. The common misconception is, like, with these, especially if there's people that have a little bit of programming experience, they understand what if-then statement is, and understand that, like, they'll think back to, like, the chat bots they had in the 1990s or whatever, where it really was just you would talk to it, it would look for keywords, and then it would pull from, like, some database full of canned responses, and that was the chat bot, right? It wasn't actually thinking; it was just regurgitating something out of a list that some programmer had populated, right? That's not what AI is doing now. I think that's a misconception. I think a lot of people don't understand that. No, that's not what AI does today. It's not just picking out, a list of things that someone else wrote for it. It's not just these canned responses. It is coming up with original responses. Another good example of how it's different is, if you take a look, there's a documentary on YouTube that it details, or it shows the history, I guess, of this AI that they programmed to play this. It's like this Korean game that, I don't know if it's Korean or Chinese. It looks like Othello, but you got these little white on one side, black on the other side, round playing pieces that you flip over, and it looks like the 80s game, board game Othello, but it's called, I think it's called Go. I know the translation's weird because the people in the West don't really play it, but it's supposed to be infinitely more complicated than chess, right? And they wrote this AI that struggled at first to beat human players because it is so complicated. And towards the end of the documentary, it was making moves that the champion, Go human opponent, was perceiving as, oh, the AI must have had a glitch there because this is really stupid. And then it would turn out that, oh no, actually it just thought of something that no human had ever thought of before. It did this weird strategy that like was completely original, wasn't programmed by, one of the programmers. And it is, it is getting better than the humans at an alarming rate.